Debate Institute Africa Speech and Debate Judging Fellowship. Like we've announced already, it's going to be our first training session, and our trainer is already around. One sec. Yeah, I just wanted to confirm. So yeah, without further ado, I'm going to ask the trainer to start off right away. I hope the admin is through with setting up the recording. We are going to be streaming live on YouTube as well. I hope Joseph will clarify on that later, or will send the link as soon as we start in the group. Yeah, just about now, I'll invite Miss Apili Cynthia to take the floor. Really, most welcome. Ready when you are.
Thank you very much, Barack. I just want to confirm, am I audible? Okay, lovely. I've just seen that in the text space. Thank you very much, Blinton. Hopefully, I've not gotten the name wrong. Good evening, everyone. My name is Cynthia. I'm going to be taking us through a session today that would be discussing the average intelligent voter. And these are just like basics of adjudication. So we'll be handling in the first part the ordinary intelligent voter standard. The second thing that we'll be handling will be avoiding special knowledge biases. And then the last thing would be understanding adjudicator disposition and neutrality, all that into who a model adjudicator is. So I think we'll break this down for both WSDC and BP, because in as much as judging is quite structured in the same way for both formats, there are a few things that shift when it comes to WSDC debate, and there are a few considerations that are there that you may most likely not find when it comes to BP debating, things like style of a speaker and how much that falls into the level of persuasion. In as much as they are kind of similar, there is like a huge nuance that comes with them that you might want to consider when you're scoring speakers. And I think we'll just look at that into detail. So before we start the session, I'm just gonna request that if we do have questions in between the session that you want to be addressed, you can feel free to put it in the text space that you have a question, and then I'll be able to allow you to unmute. As well, I just want to ask before we actually start off the session if there are expectations that we have and want to learn from this particular session, so I can be able to include that or address that within the training. So in case you do have an expectation, I'm kindly requesting that you put it in the text space, or let me just give about 3 minutes. In case you do have one, you feel free to unmute and let me know so that I can engage that as well. Okay, so the 3 minutes will elapse at like 18 past 7, and that's when I will start the training officially. So in the meantime, I'm giving space for those things to be put in the text space and for the others to be like unmute and ask. Okay, so it is exactly 18 past 7. I will start off. So the very first thing that we are going to handle is what it means to be an ordinary intelligent or like an ordinary standard voter. So when it comes to judging debates, being an ordinary voter or that ordinary judge as it possibly can be, meaning that you're applying like the okay, I've seen that. I will be able to answer it. Yes. So like I was saying, for an average intelligent voter or an ordinary understanding judge within a room, there are few things that you have to consider when you're evaluating arguments. And this is also more into how you're going to award speaks dependent off of how speakers meet those specific metrics. So the things that go into you being an average intelligence voter are your ability to be neutral, but two, your ability to avoid placing okay, your own knowledge within the debate. So that means the information that you have prior to the debate should be as standard as possible. For example, we all know the president of Uganda is Yoweri Kaguta Museveni. We all know Uganda is in East Africa. We all know that maybe the president of the US is Trump. Those are a few examples. So the gauge of what knowledge you can have as a judge before you enter around to be as ordinary as you possibly can be should be standard information, standard worldwide information, things that are known by everyone and anyone. Like the only reason you most likely don't have that information is because you don't have a radio, you don't read something. But it doesn't mean that everyone else doesn't have that information. So things that are exposed on a global spectrum is what we call the standard knowledge that you have. So you consider the fact that you are a global citizen and you have this information at your disposal. That means it prevents the idea of speakers wanting to intentionally lie about certain obvious things, and you just can't also agree to those like obvious things that fall in the paradigm of an average intelligent voter. Then, this is also very, very important because it affects the nature of feedback that you give to speakers, considering the fact that you ought not to look like you're placing your own knowledge within the debate. The biggest part is that you have to really consider the fact that it plays into how you persuade, how you are persuaded as a judge, but also the things that you are considering persuasive to you as a judge. For example, when you're giving feedback, it's okay for you to say, I don't think I was persuaded by this because there is limited information given to prove why it is this way. But also, you are not persuaded by something because as a global citizen, it's an outright lie. For example, if I came and said in a debate, Donald Trump is not the president of the US, and that is why the US is maybe significantly having an economic decline. That is, you can't be persuaded by a lie. So, the essence of you being a global citizen and considering information in that sector is to avoid the idea on you being persuaded by lies and making sure the debate is as charitable as it possibly can be. The beauty about this is that in most cases, an outright lie has the capacity to be called out by other speakers because the presumption is it's something globally known. It's something that is basic knowledge. It's something that people actually know about. I think this one cuts across for both WSCC and BP to present yourself as neutral as you possibly can be when it comes to like the knowledge spectrum or the information that is being passed within the debate. I think there are other things that we would consider that tantamount to biases when we get to that part. So the things that you have to assess as an average intelligent voter is when a speaker makes an argument, you're considering, is it logical and is it well explained? Even if it's incorrect based on your expert knowledge. I'll give an example. If you're a student of economics, because I think these are the most butchered motions around. If you're a student of economics, it's extremely possible that someone is going to talk about economics in a way that you most probably think is wrong. Are you able to separate that from how much a speaker says to prove their arguments or to logically link their arguments and make sure that they make sense? Those are a few considerations that you want to have into mind. So when you're an expert, let me just give an example. You have so much knowledge about politics. Are you able to separate the deep knowledge that you have about politics? For example, a speaker could argue that Uganda needs authoritarian leadership, and the reason as to why people are suffering from things like poverty is because of maybe, what's the word I'm looking for? Which political system do we have in Uganda? Democracy, guys. It's this bad that we can't even remember that we are a democratic nation. Like I said, so and the speaker says the reason people are suffering out of poverty is because of democracy. They're able to maybe logically link this argument and tell you, democracy makes people complacent to laws. It means the moment they feel pressed by something, regardless how good it is, they're unwilling to follow it because it presses them to the core. In as much as that is like may not be on a more expertise level the actual thing, you're asking yourself, how much has the speaker said to prove this argument, and what is the engagement to the argument? Does it make logical sense? So it's usually like the technical areas, yes, like politics, like economics, those technical areas that require certain sort of knowledge that you want to exclude your knowledge. Just a moment. Guys, if you're not debaters and you're here, please do not drag tables and make noise for the rest of us. It's either you move to class or you carry your table like a gentleman. Thank you. Okay, sorry guys. Yes, so like I was saying, you want to remove your knowledge out of the debate to make sure that you analyze it on like the logical basis that they have been able to explain the argument. And that is what it takes to like be an average intelligent voter when it comes to the knowledge that teams are being able to like exhibit, how you're able to assess that knowledge. I think then I think that just also boils down into like how biases come about due to expertise. So it's usually based off of the fact that you maybe know a lot about law, you know a lot about economics. You need to evaluate how speakers prove their arguments and make sure, like when you're discussing law in maybe a debate room, the only knowledge you can move in with is like a global knowledge. You know, law equals punishment. The law means when you commit a crime, you're punished for it. The basic things that come with understanding the law on a global scale is the only knowledge you can move in a debate with. But when it comes to like the specifics, you have to leave that up to the speakers to be able to logically prove these arguments or to explain them. Also, when it comes to rebuttals from the other team, you have to be keen enough to make sure that you are valuing the level of like engagement that comes from the other team and what that engagement does to the case in itself. So there is a big problem that comes with judges completing arguments for speakers. For example, a speaker says something, and because you know what the direction of the argument is, even when they are unable to complete that, you complete it for them. That is also something that I think is very, very particular that you should work on, because as you're giving feedback, you will end up valuing these things. And the speaker is like, but they didn't say this. And you know they didn't say it, but you intuitively understood what it is that they meant. So when you're placed in such a position, you ought to show the speakers in feedback. In as much as I do understand the direction the argument is going, you don't say it, meaning I can't fill in those blanks for you. So that is what it takes to also beat certain biases when it comes to the aspect of you filling in information for speakers, or when you see the direction a speaker is saying the argument. Why that is important is that as an average intelligent voter, it goes to interrogate how much speakers say or what they do or what they explain to persuade you to vote for them on their side. I think that is within I think that is within the paradigm of being an average intelligent voter. The other huge thing about biases now, biases could spill over into things like you've coached a team, you've debated with a team, or like you're going to maybe judge a team. Especially, I think now that we have this new crop up, most of us are maybe like senior six vacation, and you're like you're exploring the debate world, and you're being able to judge tournaments. So the thing is, people will say you're brilliant enough, and you have the capacity to separate your personal interactions from the debate room, which is true. But the reason as to why, in most cases, we are asked to establish those clashes is because no matter how good you are, there is a perception around you. And also because a lot of us don't know how to separate the interactions that we have as judges with students. It means then the perception remains a bit more consistent and it's hard to beat that as a bias. So I would advise that the thing to do would be you establish that as a clash. It kills nothing, it doesn't even kill your pride. And people are able to validate how good you are independently. I think with experience, with growth, and with time. But to prevent a perception around you that would lead to clashes and complications in the tournament, because they are patrons that would use that simple thing against you to say that you were biased against their team. And those things ruin your capacity to grow as a judge within the space, especially a respectable one. So the most significant clashes that I would advise is when you have coached a team, when you have debated within a team, you want to make sure that you're not letting that affect you. So what you would do is to clash the team anyways. The other thing in terms of biases that I think would constitute, I think is something I already handle, which is in terms of like expertise. I think those basic things are like the average intelligent voter basics that you can consider so that you're able to not just appear neutral, but it also impacts the perception around the OA that you're giving to speakers. See, sometimes you would have a call and you give OA and speakers are not satisfied with the OA. Not because you're wrong or not because your OA doesn't address the core issues or the pertinent issues within the debate, but it's more likely because of like the perception that is created around you as an individual or as a judge. So to prevent those biases and make sure that you're being as effective as possible as a judge and that kids are able to grow from the feedback that you're giving them is considering all the external aspects that would affect you and putting them out of the picture. To that point, do we have any questions? Okay, so I think I'd begin by addressing the question in the text space. How do judges balance content and skills of debaters? So when you're balancing content and skills, I would refer you to the judging manual, both WSDC and BP. You would notice that the scoring scale has a criteria for which you use to like validate content. For example, content is not just on the basis that a speaker knows so many things and they're able to say them in a round. Content is also strategic in nature. So you want to ask, does the content address the core issue of the debate? Does it resolve or does it respond to the motion burdens in the debate? So that is how you evaluate content. Then when it comes to skills, skills also fall through with strategy. You're asking yourself, how much does a speaker say to persuade me to buy this particular argument? I think all those considerations help you to balance between skills and content. You will notice a speaker that has the skill is able to strategize content. That means that they are more likely giving you the outmost content that is necessary to make responses within the round or to have constructive material within the round. That is how you balance content and skills within debate and for you to evaluate the debates. Does this answer your question, Nelson? Okay, lovely. It does. So there were just three sectors, and I think these are just the fundamentals. These are just the fundamentals of like judging, so there would not be really much content. Let me see. Shadrach has a question. To what extent do you remain an average intelligent voter at a point where both teams drift off the requirements of the motion? Okay. in cases that teams drift off the content of the motion or what the motion burden is, you still in all capacities remain as an average intelligent voter. There is always a proximity to respond to the motion burden. So what you do now is to evaluate the proximity to respond to the motion burden and who is able to at least try and get there. Then in your feedback, you would be able to let them know how they've misfired from that. But the core of it, even when a speaker is off motion burden, they can't be too off to not have anything that responds or makes sense to some extent. So evaluating that in most cases is saying, this is what you say, this is how I perceive what you say, and this is how I value it within the round. So you evaluate what is it that the speaker has said and how proximate is it to responding to the motion burden. Does this respond to your question, Shadrach? Can put that in the text box and I'll be able to see it. Okay, lovely, it does. But wait, as there are some people who are putting on specs this term. You used to have specs. That's right. Let me come back to you. Okay. So I think we've talked about what it means to be the ordinary intelligent voter. Then the other thing we've talked about is avoiding special knowledge and biases. The final thing that we are supposed to discuss in this session is understanding adjudicator disposition and neutrality. And I think this just like covers all the other aspects of biases. So being neutral within a round is very, very important in terms of like the feedback that you're as well going to give, which I think you cover in terms of how to give good constructive feedback to speakers. But it's very, very important that in all aspects you look as neutral as possible. This would also mean limiting the type of engagement that you have with students during a tournament so that you avoid creating a certain perception around you. I would tell you, when speakers come for tournaments, everyone comes with a goal to win. That means, in the case that they are not winning or don't win, they want to have everything possible, not to discredit themselves, but to discredit the externalities that have led to their failure. So they would put the blame on you. I promise you. If you place yourselves in like contradictory situations that allow people to blame you for things, they're gonna blame you. So you want to look as neutral as possible by limiting the type of engagement that you have with speakers, but also by like being able to be as constructive as possible within the round. The practices that you have in round, dozing in rounds, sleeping in rounds, like making faces in rounds. Sometimes these things are unavoidable. Like there's times someone will say something and you're like, no, you didn't. Like, no, you didn't just say this. But you have to be able to mind your body language, mind your posture, avoid sleeping and dozing in rounds to be able to create a positive perception around your ability to listen to the debate and evaluate the debate. Because that body language in itself can create a bias on you as a judge and how much kids are able to like respect you in rounds. When it comes to BP, how much speakers are able to respect the feedback that you give or the verdicts that you give. So I think those are like the fundamental basics. The core of adjudication in itself is being able to be neutral, but also following the standard of the debate manuals that you have available to you. So the other part about being an average intelligent voter is understanding the manual and the specifics of the manual. So there are basic things. For example, you know that the ability for a speaker to persuade you, okay, the ability for a speaker to persuade you should also depend on what the requirements of a motion are. For example, if it's a policy debate and the other team is burdening this team to give them a counterfactual, or to explain what their counter policy would look like. In the case that it is necessary, you're paying attention to that and you're backing it up with why you are voting for them in the way that you are voting for them. If it's a narrative motion, you know that teams ought to explain what the impact of the narrative in itself is. So you have to pay keen attention to these aspects to be able to use them or to pitch them up against the level of persuasion that is happening within the debate. I think that is more to the basics. I want to come and tell you, don't worry, let me finish here. Could you please later give tips on how to avoid spacing out in the middle of judging a debate? It happens sometimes, especially in a board. Okay, so here's the thing. I think this is just about your passion. the same passion that you apply when you're speaking should quite be the same passion that you apply when you are judging a debate. No, because I do genuinely understand there are times that it gets tough and speakers are boring and they're just not addressing what ought to be the core of the motion. You want to have a bottle of water with you to constantly keep yourself awake, but also you would want to correct those things that speakers are getting wrong. So, in the bid to have that, the biggest tip I would say is pay attention to the debate to get what it is that speakers are saying so that you're able to correct it. That's the biggest thing. When I am paying attention to a debate and I feel like the debate is by far off, or I feel like speakers are not engaging what ought to be engaged, and the debate becomes a tad bit boring, especially when you're judging novices within the space. I take water, a lot of water. I have water with me so that I make sure that I'm awake fully. But the biggest push that I have is that I need to explain to them why the things that they are saying are not what the debate seeks to address so that they're able to rectify that. So it's paying attention. You push yourself to pay attention to the debate because you want to correct the debate. Does that make sense to you? I do not know how to pronounce the name, so I don't want to pronounce it wrong. But does this respond to you? See, okay, lovely, it does. So I think this is more the basis of what like a model adjudicator would do and what it looks like to be an average intelligent voter. I think the biggest takeaways would be being able to like understand, because a couple of things that there are a couple of things that fall into adjudication as well, such as evaluating team contribution, evaluating speaker contribution to the round, and also there is a point where you have to evaluate how speakers respond to the motion burden. So the best way that you're able to have that evaluation on the standard of an average intelligent voter is by following through with the manual itself. So you want to pay attention to like the different segments of the like when it comes to team composition, for example, there are times where you have one really good speaker and then the other speaker is more average. So the average intelligent voter would analyze how this team contributes to the round before you consider how these individuals contribute to the round, because their individual contribution tantamounts to their speaks. However, their team contribution tantamounts to the rank that they have in the debate. So, because one speaker is per se average, you can't discard the information that comes from the other speaker, for example. All those things fall into like the spectrum of being an average intelligent voter. But I think for now, we would just cover the basics, and more of these would come in the different sessions that you have to handle. Because looking at like the schedule that we have, there are different sects that cover like the different sects of a training that cover a few of the things that I would maybe talk about now. So that means that we have to like understand them on a deeper level from the different coaches that are going to be able to the different trainers, sorry, that are going to be able to handle that content or to handle that information. So that is just the basics of what it is to be an average intelligent voter. Are there any questions up until now before I have to like hand back over? I would welcome questions. Yeah. Wait, so we have I'm doing an online station. Wait, all these numbers are because people are going to Namabunga on Friday or what? Um yes, I'm waiting for the person texting in the text space so that I can answer that question. But in case you do have a question outside of that, you can feel free to admit and ask. To the class? Okay, so I've just seen a question. In case of info slides and new matter is brought up, what should the average intelligent voter do? So, info slides are usually meant to give direction to the debate, especially when it comes to like motions that are drafted off of movies or that try to engage a different spectrum of life. When you have like hypothetical motions. So, what new information would look like in an info slide motion is things that are generally out of the info slide and shift the spectrum of the debate. For example, if the info slide assumes something does not exist and speakers try to prove that it already exists anyway. As an average intelligent voter, by virtue of the fact that that is outside of the info slide, it creates an unfair burden to the other team because there is a direction that the info slide is trying to spin the debate to exist in. So that is information that you most at times explain to speakers why you're discarding, but also the nature of debates that you have are spontaneous because speakers are able to identify and point out or flag those things. But those are things that you have to just genuinely disregard because they shift the balance of the motion burdens or they shift the balance of how speakers now ought to engage with the motion in itself. So information that is outside of the info slide and shifts the paradigm of the debate or shifts the burden of the debate is information that usually as the average intelligent voter you want to discard and explain to speakers why you discard that information when you are giving feedback. Does this respond to your question, Daniel Emmanuel? Yes. Okay, lovely. Okay, I'm just waiting for the other people that are texting in the space so I can respond to your questions as well. Okay, so I've just seen Shadrach's question. In an event that a team introduces new content late in the debate, but it is so crucial and affects the entire matter of the debate, how do we handle that? So there is a specification in the manual that talks about late information, like you bring late information to the debate. In as much as it's good information, and no matter how much of a positive effect it can have on your case, that is information you can't regard. Late information comes too late in a debate, like as late as third speeches. Also, it's not new analysis according to the question. You've said it's new content. That means that there's a diversity in the argumentation, or it's something that has entirely not existed in the debate. You can't credit that information in as much as it's good. So, meaning that in WSTC, for example, a team loses out on strategy that they have chosen to like take within the debate. So it lessens their speaks dependent just off of the strategy as a team, and it also affects what their team contribution is. Let information means there is a different spark in the debates that ought to be taken, and the other teams now have no way to engage with that material. So that is information that you can't credit. In BP debate, usually happens like within whip speeches. This is something completely new that has not been in the debate, but it makes a lot of sense to the debate. So in most cases, you penalize that by not considering that information when you're weighing up the engagement within the teams, so that the burdens are not unfair or uncharitable, where you have speakers saying how they didn't have the chance to respond to that material because it was in third speech. I hope that replies or responds to your question, Shadrach. Oh, okay. I've just seen. Yeah, sorry. Antonita. I hope that responds to your question, Antonita. So let me just, gentlemen, gentlemen, moving to teams is not noise. Gentlemen. Okay. Okay, so Shadrach's question is for teams that present complex arguments that they don't follow up later in the debate and is neither rebutted by the counter team, do you let it stand as a contribution to the team that presented it? Okay, so a response to this is the argument is complex, but how much has a speaker labored to explain the argument for it to turn amount as a positive thing? I'll give an example. There's a new crop up within the circuit of people running principles, especially within WSTC debates. So someone runs a principle and they don't even explain how the principle plays out within the debate. And then the other team does not respond to it. It can't become a burden to the other team to respond to something that is maybe uncharitably explained. So you have to consider the level of persuasiveness that is taken to engage the argument. In as much as it's complex, the team that has brought it up, what do they do insofar as persuading you to believe that argument is concerned? Like we say, you follow the structure of argumentation. You state the argument, you establish the premise of the argument, you go ahead to analyze the argument and then analyze the impact of the argument. So if a speaker did not do all those things, it means that the level of persuasion that the argument has is less. Therefore, you weigh what contribution it has, either as engagement to the other team or as a positive argument to their case to build up what their case like innately means to the round. So you evaluate it in terms of how much it contributes to the debate. There is the aspect in terms of like dropping arguments, like speakers say something and then drop it. That in terms of like technique, sorry, in terms of style, is supposed to affect the level of persuasion. So in most cases, it would either mean that the scale at which a certain team is beating the other is now marginal. In as much as the argument, for example, was not engaged, that is to say, if the other team's arguments were as well far off and didn't respond to the motion burden, you would say this argument was mentioned. However, the level of persuasiveness to show why it mattered to the debate was less, though it still stood to contribute to a certain extent to the positive material that they have. You would say, if maybe that was a proposition argument, you would explain why. In as much as prop is not extremely persuasive, op as well doesn't offer to you arguments to make their case viable within the round. But it means then what will happen when you're gauging which team wins is that the scale or the margin at which you're awarding speaks ought to be less to show the quality or to reflect the quality of the round in terms of argumentation. Does this respond to you, Shadrach? You could put that in the text space. Okay, what is the best way to give constructive criticism to a team that has lost but made a careless mistake? I think this is just going to fall in the other this is just going to fall in the other session that maybe talks about how you give feedback to teams. So this is not for this session. I think I'd push this question to the next session. What is the metric to call a round below average? So below average rounds depend on the quality of argumentation and then how the argumentation responds to the motion burden. So a speaker is able to respond to the motion burden, but B, a speaker is able to give constructive arguments to respond to the motion in itself. That is how you get below average versus above average rounds. How speakers like structure their speeches, how they structure their arguments, the style that goes ahead to play into the arguments, the type of cases or the strategy that they're taking to run arguments. Does this respond to your question, Toby? Yes, it does. Okay, lovely. So, are there any other questions before I have to go off the call? You want? Wait, I'm coming. Okay, I'm gonna request. Could we just and I see Kelvin typing. Is it okay if you unmute and ask the question? Oh, so I just noticed I said what I said when I was muted. I was saying, in case there are no further questions, I will just hand over to Berak, the coordinator. In case you do have further questions, feel free to reach out to him to either give you my number or something like that, and then I'll be able to respond to your questions. Yeah, thank you all. Bye.
All right, so that brings us to the end of today's session. Um, yeah, a very huge thank you to Cynthia. I don't know if she's left already. Yeah, yeah. So, and to everyone else who's been around, thanks a lot for showing up. Yeah, and okay, guys, this is just on a serious note. Let us for those that didn't really take the session seriously, you'll need to follow up on YouTube. Good enough. Luckily for you guys, there's that provision. Yeah, so you can follow up on YouTube and in the group chat. That is the very last text there is. Yeah, so you can go find the link, follow through because there's going to be a test, an evaluation test, and because you all know there's going to be certification after everything is done, and you all know not everyone is going to be certified. So we'll have an evaluation test, and that will be on Wednesday. Yeah, for those that have already left, I'll go ahead and communicate again in the group. Yeah, but it will be on Wednesday. Excuse me. Um, so that we can establish a threshold and be able to determine the cut. Yeah, so guys, you can go follow through on YouTube. Ask all your friends who have missed to not miss again, or else that will be good for them. Until next time, see you next session. Same place, same energy. Stay sharp, guys. Our session is done. Yeah, have a good night.